I'm Becky Robinson, 29 years old, and I went from being the family's forgotten planner to standing on stage at the Pentagon receiving an award from the Secretary of Defense. For years, I carried my family, handling their trips, covering their shortfalls, putting their needs before my own. But on Thanksgiving, they boarded a plane to Paris without me, leaving a note that said, "You're not worth a seat, deadbeat." That was the moment I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been dismissed or humiliated by the very people you sacrificed for? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I dive into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to draw the line and stand tall after being written off, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries and self-worth. What happened next might surprise you. I grew up in a house where appearances mattered more than anything else. My mother collected vacation photos like trophies, arranging them on the mantle in perfect chronological order. Paris in spring, Rome in summer, London for Christmas shopping. Each trip was documented with professional precision, posted online with captions about blessed family time and making memories. What the photos didn't show was who planned the itineraries, who handled the logistics, who quietly covered the shortfalls when my parents' budgeting fell apart at the last minute. That person was me. From the time I turned 16, I became the family's invisible backbone. While my siblings posed for Instagram photos at famous landmarks, I was the one calling hotels to confirm reservations, researching restaurant recommendations, and keeping track of passports and boarding passes. My parents praised my organizational skills, but never connected those skills to actual competence or intelligence. To them, I was just reliable, like a piece of furniture that happened to be useful. The pattern started small. "Becky, can you call the travel agent? You're so good at these things." Then it escalated. "Becky, we're short $300 for the hotel deposit. Can you cover it? We'll pay you back." They never did, but I never asked. I told myself it was family, and family helped each other. I convinced myself that being needed was the same as being valued. When I enlisted in the Air Force at 18, my parents treated it like a phase. "Military service looks good on college applications," my father said, missing the point entirely. I wasn't planning to apply to college. I had found something bigger than myself, something that demanded excellence and gave recognition in return. But to my family, my uniform was just another costume, less impressive than my brother's business suits or my sister's designer dresses. During basic training, I excelled. Physical fitness, academic performance, leadership potential, I ranked in the top 5% of my class. When I graduated, my family attended the ceremony, but they spent more time complaining about the heat and the uncomfortable bleachers than celebrating my achievement. "At least it's over now," my mother whispered during the reception, as if my military career was something I was recovering from rather than beginning. The disconnect only grew wider as I advanced through my service. I specialized in cybersecurity and intelligence analysis, work that required security clearances and often involved classified operations. When relatives asked what I did for a living, my parents would wave their hands vaguely and say, "Oh, Becky works for the government. It's very technical." They reduced years of specialized training and dangerous, important work to the equivalent of filing papers in a cubicle. Meanwhile, they continued their lifestyle of extended vacations and expensive dinners, often funded by credit cards and my mother's inheritance. They assumed I would always be available to help when things got complicated. Flight delayed? Call Becky. She'll figure out the rebooking. Restaurant reservation lost? Becky speaks multiple languages. She can sort it out. Need someone to house sit and water the plants? Becky doesn't have a real social life anyway. The truth was, I did have a social life, but it existed in a world they couldn't understand. My military colleagues became my chosen family. These were people who understood sacrifice, who valued competence over connections, who judged you by your actions under pressure rather than your Instagram aesthetic. With them, I felt seen and respected in ways my biological family had never managed. But I kept trying to bridge the gap. I would share stories from my deployments, carefully edited to remove classified details, hoping to help them understand the significance of my work. Their responses were always the same: Polite disinterest followed by a quick change of subject to something more comfortable, like my sister's latest promotion or my brother's new car. The breaking point began forming during my second deployment overseas. I was stationed at a forward operating base, working 16-hour days analyzing intelligence that directly impacted mission safety. The work was intense and meaningful, but also isolating. I looked forward to video calls home, hoping for connection and support. Instead, I got updates about neighborhood drama and complaints about my absence from family gatherings. "You missed Aunt Carol's birthday party," my mother said during one call, her voice carrying that familiar note of disappointment. "I'm deployed, Mom. I can't exactly request leave for birthday parties." "Well, maybe if you had chosen a different career path, you'd be able to prioritize family." That comment stayed with me for weeks. The idea that my service, protecting national security, supporting missions that kept people safe, was somehow a selfish career choice that showed disregard for family priorities. It revealed how fundamentally they misunderstood both my work and my character. When I returned from deployment, I tried to reconnect, but the distance had grown during my absence. They had developed new routines that didn't include me, new inside jokes I wasn't part of, new traditions that had formed in my absence. I felt like a guest in my own family, tolerated but not truly welcomed. The final insult came during what should have been a celebration. I had been selected for a prestigious assignment at the Pentagon, working directly with senior leadership on strategic initiatives. This was a career-defining opportunity, recognition of my expertise and leadership potential. When I shared the news at a family dinner, expecting pride and congratulation, the response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, honey," my father said, barely looking up from his phone. "Will you finally have a normal schedule now?" My brother, newly married to someone who had strong opinions about military culture, smirked and said, "As long as you don't become one of those rigid military types who can't function in the real world." The real world. As if the work I did, the responsibility I carried, the lives that depended on intelligence analysis and strategic planning, were somehow less real than their corporate jobs and social media presence. I realized in that moment that no achievement would ever be significant enough to earn their respect, because they had fundamentally decided that my chosen path was inferior to theirs. That night, lying in my own apartment, the first time I had lived alone since joining the military, I made a decision. I would stop trying to prove my worth to people who were determined not to see it. I would stop subsidizing their lifestyle with my time, energy, and money. I would stop accepting invitations to family events where I was treated as an afterthought. I didn't announce this decision dramatically or explain my reasoning. I simply began to live differently, focusing my energy on relationships that reciprocated respect and appreciation. I had finally learned that some people will never value what you bring to their lives, no matter how essential or generous your contributions. The question wasn't whether I was good enough for my family. The question was whether they were good enough for me. The subtle shifts began months before the Thanksgiving incident that would change everything. At first, I attributed the changes to normal family dynamics. People get busy, priorities shift, communication becomes less frequent. But as weeks turned into months, I began to notice a pattern of deliberate exclusion that went beyond simple oversight. It started with holiday planning. For years, I had been the family coordinator, the one who called everyone to confirm dates, researched restaurants for reservations, and created shared calendars to ensure everyone could attend. But that year, conversations were happening without me. I would discover plans secondhand, through casual comments or social media posts, always with the same explanation: "We didn't want to bother you with your busy schedule." My busy schedule. It became their universal excuse for everything: why I wasn't consulted about my grandmother's birthday celebration, why I wasn't invited to my cousin's engagement party, why family group texts somehow never included me despite my phone number remaining unchanged. They had weaponized my military commitments, using my service as justification for treating me like an optional participant in family life. The irony was devastating. Years of deployment schedules and training exercises had taught me to be incredibly organized with personal time. I maintained detailed calendars specifically so I could participate in family events when possible. I had taken leave for weddings, rearranged duty schedules for milestone birthdays, and spent considerable money on last-minute flights to attend gatherings that meant something to the people I loved. But somehow, my efforts to prioritize family had been twisted into evidence that I didn't have time for them. The group text situation became particularly painful. I remained in the official family chat, but it became a graveyard of unanswered messages. When I shared updates about work achievements or interesting experiences from assignments, the responses were minimal, maybe a single emoji from one person, sometimes complete silence. Meanwhile, my sister's restaurant photos generated dozens of enthusiastic comments, and my brother's work complaints sparked long, supportive conversations. I tried addressing it directly once. During a rare family dinner, I mentioned feeling out of the loop on recent family decisions. The response was swift and coordinated, as if they had prepared for this moment. "You're never around," my sister said, not looking up from her phone. "We can't wait on your schedule forever," added my brother. My mother, the diplomat, tried to soften the blow. "Honey, you know we love you, but your lifestyle is just so different from ours. We've learned to make plans that work for everyone else." Everyone else. The phrase hung in the air like an official verdict. I was no longer part of everyone. I had been reclassified as an exception, a special case that required accommodation they were no longer willing to provide. The most painful part was watching them bond over my absence. They developed new traditions during holidays I missed due to military obligations, created inside jokes about situations I wasn't present for, and formed stronger connections with each other while treating my physical presence as increasingly irrelevant. When I was home, they would reference conversations and experiences that had happened without me, not maliciously, but with the casual assumption that I wouldn't understand or wouldn't be interested. My brother's wife became particularly influential in this shift. She had strong opinions about military culture, viewing it as rigid and outdated, and she wasn't shy about sharing these views during family gatherings. "Military people are so intense," she would say, laughing, while looking directly at me. "Always so serious about everything. Can't just relax and have fun." Her comments were always delivered with a smile, making them difficult to challenge without seeming humorless or defensive. But the message was clear. My military service had made me incompatible with family fun, too serious for casual gatherings, too rigid for spontaneous plans. Gradually, others began echoing her sentiments, treating my military background as a personality flaw rather than a professional achievement. The most devastating realization came during a weekend visit home. I arrived to find my family sorting through old photo albums, preparing a slideshow for my parents' anniversary celebration. Decades of family memories were spread across the dining room table: birthday parties, graduations, vacations, holidays. As I watched them select photos for the presentation, I noticed a disturbing pattern. Images that included me were consistently passed over in favor of photos where I was absent or barely visible. "This one from the beach house is perfect," my sister said, holding up a photo from last summer's vacation, a vacation I had missed due to a training exercise. "Look how happy everyone looks," my mother agreed. I pointed to another photo from the same vacation, taken during a video call where I had joined virtually from my base. In the image, my family was crowded around a laptop screen, smiling and waving at the camera. It captured a moment of connection despite physical distance, proof that technology could bridge gaps when family commitment existed on both sides. "What about this one?" I suggested quietly. They looked at the photo with visible discomfort. "It's nice," my father said diplomatically, "but it doesn't really capture the spirit of family vacation, does it? We want photos that show everyone together." Everyone together, except me. The subtext was becoming text. My virtual presence didn't count as real participation. My efforts to maintain connection from thousands of miles away were classified as inadequate substitutes for physical attendance. No consideration was given to the sacrifices I had made to participate even remotely, the scheduling challenges I had navigated to join their video calls, the genuine joy I had felt at seeing their faces even through a screen. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and finally acknowledged what I had been trying to deny for months. My family had made a collective decision about my place in their lives, and that place was increasingly marginal. They had grown comfortable with my absence and were actively creating a family narrative that positioned me as an optional character rather than an essential member. The psychological shift was profound. For years, I had defined myself partly through my role as the responsible daughter, the one who could be counted on, the one who solved problems and provided stability. But they no longer wanted or needed that version of me. They had found their equilibrium without me, and my presence had become more disruptive than welcome. I began to understand that the exclusion wasn't accidental or temporary. It was systematic and intentional, designed to minimize my importance in family dynamics without the messiness of direct confrontation. They could maintain their self-image as loving family members while gradually erasing me from their day-to-day reality. The realization was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it confirmed my worst fears about my place in their lives. Liberating because it freed me from the exhausting effort of trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I wasn't worth their full consideration. The stage was set for the ultimate test of whether family bonds could survive such calculated indifference. The note was sitting on my kitchen counter when I returned from base that Wednesday evening before Thanksgiving. Not hidden, not tucked discreetly somewhere I might miss it, placed prominently in the center of the counter, impossible to ignore. My name was written on the envelope in my mother's careful handwriting, the same script that had labeled my lunchboxes and signed permission slips throughout childhood. Inside, folded on my mother's personal stationery with the little blue flowers around the border, were 2 sentences that ended my relationship with my family. We've decided to spend Thanksgiving in Paris. You're not worth a seat, deadbeat. I read it 3 times before the words registered completely. Not, we couldn't afford an extra ticket, or we didn't think you could get leave. Not even, we forgot to include you in the planning. They had made a deliberate calculation about my value and determined that I wasn't worth the cost of airfare. The word deadbeat was particularly stunning, a term typically reserved for people who don't pay their debts or meet their responsibilities, applied to someone who had financially subsidized their lifestyle for years. The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision. They knew exactly how much those words would hurt, knew exactly how thoroughly they would destroy any remaining illusion that I was valued or wanted. This wasn't casual thoughtlessness or poor communication. This was a formal dismissal, delivered with the kind of calculated coldness typically reserved for ending business relationships. I set the note on the counter and walked through my apartment, trying to process what had just happened. Everything looked the same. My furniture, my photographs, my books, but something fundamental had shifted. The people I had spent my entire life trying to please, trying to help, trying to love despite their consistent indifference, had finally said what they really thought of me. I wasn't worth a seat at their table, literally or figuratively. My phone buzzed with notifications. Instagram updates from the airport. Paris, here we come, with photos of boarding passes and champagne glasses. Family vacation time, with group selfies that notably did not include an empty space where I might have been. They were celebrating my absence, documenting their joy at leaving me behind. The timing was particularly cruel. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday, despite my family's shortcomings. There was something about the forced gratitude, the tradition of reflecting on blessings, that appealed to my military mindset. I had missed several Thanksgiving celebrations due to deployments, but I had always tried to participate somehow. Video calls during dinner, care packages sent ahead of time, arrangements made to celebrate when I returned. Now I understood that my efforts had been unwanted complications in their holiday plans. They preferred Thanksgiving without me, preferred family time that didn't require accommodation or consideration for my schedule. The Paris trip wasn't just a vacation. It was a statement. They were showing me, and presumably each other, what family gatherings looked like when I wasn't around to create logistical challenges or remind them of uncomfortable realities. I thought about calling someone, a friend, a colleague, anyone who might offer perspective or comfort. But what would I say? That my family had abandoned me for Thanksgiving and left a note calling me worthless? The situation was so bizarre, so unnecessarily cruel, that it would be difficult to explain without sounding like I was exaggerating or seeking sympathy. Instead, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to understand how we had reached this point. There had been warning signs, certainly, but nothing that had prepared me for this level of direct hostility. Even during our worst disagreements, even when they dismissed my career or ignored my achievements, there had been a pretense of familial affection. This note stripped away all pretense and revealed what they actually thought of me. The word deadbeat kept echoing in my mind. I tried to understand how they could apply that term to someone who had consistently given more than she received, who had subsidized their lifestyle and solved their problems without complaint. Then I realized that in their minds, I had failed to provide the one thing they actually wanted from me: validation of their choices and lifestyle without question or challenge. My military service had become an implicit criticism of their priorities. My financial independence highlighted their poor money management. My professional achievements made their social media careers look shallow by comparison. I wasn't a deadbeat in any conventional sense, but I was a deadbeat daughter in their specific definition, someone who failed to enthusiastically support and celebrate their approach to life. The apartment felt different now, somehow larger and emptier at the same time. This was what freedom looked like, I realized. No more phone calls asking for favors. No more last-minute requests for money or logistical support. No more pretending that their criticism was constructive or that their indifference was temporary. They had severed the relationship definitively, and despite the pain, there was relief in the clarity. I folded the note carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Not because I wanted to preserve it, but because I understood it might be important later. Evidence, perhaps, of how thoroughly they had misjudged both my character and my worth. Evidence that when the consequences of their decision became clear, there had been no misunderstanding about their intentions. Thursday morning arrived gray and quiet. I made coffee and toast, the same breakfast I had eaten hundreds of times, but everything felt different now. This was my first Thanksgiving as someone who didn't have a family anymore. The silence in my apartment wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. No drama, no criticism, no need to manage other people's emotions or expectations. By noon, their social media updates would begin showing their Paris adventure. Café au lait and croissants, tourist selfies at famous landmarks, group photos that would be captioned with gratitude hashtags. They would perform thankfulness while demonstrating its complete absence, celebrating family while excluding a family member with deliberate cruelty. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was curious. Curious to see how they would react when they discovered what they had missed by dismissing me so completely. Curious to learn whether they would eventually understand the magnitude of their mistake. Curious to find out whether people who could write such a note were capable of genuine remorse or growth. The reckoning was coming, though they didn't know it yet. In a few hours, I would put on my dress blue uniform and represent everything they had decided wasn't worth their consideration. I would stand in front of people who understood service and sacrifice, people who valued competence and character over social media aesthetics and European vacations. They thought they were punishing me by leaving me behind. Instead, they had freed me to shine without their shadows dimming my light. The hours after reading that note passed in a strange calm. I should have been devastated, should have been making desperate phone calls or booking last-minute flights to Paris to confront them. Instead, I felt oddly detached, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. The immediate pain was there, sharp and undeniable, but underneath it was something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in my adult life, I had absolute clarity about where I stood with my family. No more wondering if I was imagining their indifference. No more making excuses for their behavior or questioning my own perceptions. They had eliminated any ambiguity with 2 sentences that revealed exactly how they saw me. I called in sick to work that Thursday, which was technically true. I was sick of pretending that dysfunctional relationships were normal, sick of accepting crumbs of affection from people who should have loved me unconditionally. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment with unusual thoroughness, as if I were preparing for a new chapter that required a fresh space. My phone remained silent except for their Paris updates. Photos of the Eiffel Tower, French pastries, museum visits. Each post was tagged with family members' names, everyone except me. The omission was so consistent it had to be deliberate. They weren't just excluding me from the trip, They were erasing me from the narrative entirely. I found myself thinking about my military colleagues, people who understood loyalty and sacrifice in ways my biological family never had. Captain Rodriguez, who had mentored me through my early years and taught me that respect is earned through consistency, not demanded through relationship. Sergeant Martinez, who had covered my duties when my grandmother was dying so I could fly home for the funeral. Lieutenant Chin, who had nominated me for commendations and pushed for my advancement because she believed in my potential. These people had become my chosen family without my fully realizing it. They celebrated my achievements genuinely, supported me during difficult assignments, and never questioned whether my career was worthwhile or legitimate. With them, I didn't have to prove my value or apologize for my ambitions. I was valued for exactly who I was and what I brought to the team. The contrast was stark and painful. I had spent years trying to earn approval from people who had decided I wasn't worth their consideration, while surrounding myself daily with people who recognized and appreciated my contributions. I had been seeking validation from the wrong sources, measuring my worth by the standards of people who didn't understand or respect what I did. That afternoon, I received a text from my colleague Becky. "Happy Thanksgiving. Grateful to serve alongside someone as dedicated and skilled as you. Hope you're having a great day with family." The irony of receiving more genuine appreciation from a coworker than from my actual relatives wasn't lost on me. I stared at the message for several minutes before responding, grateful for colleagues who feel like family. Hope your day is wonderful too. It was the first time I had ever acknowledged that my military family might be more important than my biological one. The admission felt both liberating and sad, liberating because it was honest, sad because it represented the death of hopes I had carried since childhood. Evening brought a call from my mentor, Colonel Williams, asking if I was prepared for Friday's ceremony. The Pentagon award presentation had been scheduled for months, recognition for a cybersecurity initiative that had prevented several potential breaches of classified systems. It was significant professional recognition, the kind of achievement that typically prompted family celebrations and proud social media posts. "Yes, sir. I'm ready," I told him. "Your family coming to watch?" The question hung in the air. I could have made excuses, could have said they were unable to attend due to scheduling conflicts. Instead, I found myself telling the truth. "No, sir. They won't be there." "Their loss," he said simply. "What you accomplished with that security protocol was exceptional. The secretary specifically requested to meet you. That's career-defining recognition, Lieutenant." After the call ended, I sat in my quiet apartment and realized something had fundamentally changed. For years, I had defined success partly by whether my family acknowledged it. Their approval had been a secondary but important measure of whether my achievements mattered. Now, for the first time, their absence from an important moment felt like their failure, not mine. I spent the evening pressing my dress blue uniform and polishing my shoes, rituals that had always calmed my nerves before important ceremonies. But I wasn't nervous. I was focused, clear about what the next day represented. Not just professional recognition, but personal declaration. I would stand on that stage as exactly who I had become through years of service and sacrifice, someone worthy of respect and recognition, regardless of whether my biological family could see it. The silence from my family was complete now. No texts asking about my Thanksgiving plans, no calls checking if I was okay being alone for the holiday, no acknowledgement that they had left behind a daughter and sister. They were fully immersed in their Paris experience, posting photos and updates as if their family had always been exactly the size it was now. I understood that this silence would continue until something forced them to break it. They had made their statement and were comfortable with the consequences, at least as they understood them. They had calculated that excluding me would have no meaningful impact on their lives or their family dynamic. They had decided that I brought nothing essential to their relationships. Tomorrow would test the accuracy of their calculations. Tomorrow, they would discover what they had missed while they were drinking wine in Parisian cafes and taking selfies at tourist attractions. Tomorrow, the daughter they had deemed worthless would receive recognition from the highest levels of military leadership, broadcast nationally and documented permanently. I went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to my family, complete indifference to their opinion. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the clarity that comes from knowing exactly where you stand and exactly what you're worth, regardless of what anyone else believes. The Pentagon ceremony was scheduled for 1,400 hours, military time for 2 p.m. on what should have been a quiet Friday after Thanksgiving. Most federal employees had extended the holiday weekend, making the building unusually quiet as I walked through security and made my way to the ceremony hall. My dress blue uniform felt perfect, every ribbon properly placed, every piece of brass polished to mirror brightness, every detail reflecting the precision and pride that had defined my military career. I had attended dozens of military ceremonies, but being the honoree felt different. The weight of recognition, earned through months of 18-hour days and technical expertise that had prevented security breaches that could have compromised national intelligence, settled on my shoulders like a familiar burden. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was validation of everything I had sacrificed to build my career. Colonel Williams found me in the preparation area, reviewing my brief remarks for the media portion of the event. "How are you feeling, Lieutenant?" "Ready, sir. Honored to be here." "Good. The Secretary has been looking forward to meeting you. Your work on the cybersecurity initiative has been briefed all the way up to the Joint Chiefs." That's exceptional recognition for someone at your level. The irony wasn't lost on me. The highest levels of military and civilian leadership understood the significance of my work, while my own family had dismissed my entire career as a temporary phase. The disconnect was so profound it would have been funny if it weren't so painful. As ceremony time approached, I noticed the media presence. Television cameras from major networks, military journalists, photographers documenting the event for official records and public relations purposes. The Pentagon took these ceremonies seriously, understanding their importance for both individual recognition and broader public education about military service and achievement. The ceremony began with formal military protocols, presentation of colors, playing of the national anthem, remarks from senior officials about the importance of cybersecurity in modern defense operations. I stood at attention, focused on representing not just myself but everyone who had supported my career development and believed in my potential. When Secretary of Defense Morrison called my name and rank, I stepped forward with the precise movements that had been drilled into me during years of military training. The citation he read described technical achievements and their strategic impact in language that made my work sound appropriately significant. For exceptional service in developing and implementing cybersecurity protocols that prevented multiple potential breaches of classified defense systems, demonstrating technical expertise and innovative thinking that enhanced national security capabilities. The words continued, but I found myself thinking about my family, somewhere in Paris, completely unaware that their deadbeat daughter was receiving recognition from the Secretary of Defense. They were probably posting photos of their lunch, captioning images with gratitude hashtags while remaining genuinely ungrateful for everything I had contributed to their lives over the years. The medal itself was beautiful, a heavy brass medallion on a ribbon of red, white, and blue, representing service above self and excellence in defense of the nation. As the Secretary placed it around my neck, cameras captured the moment from multiple angles. This image would be distributed to news outlets, posted on official Defense Department websites, and archived in permanent military records. "Congratulations, Lieutenant," the Secretary said, loud enough for the audience to hear. "Your service exemplifies the very best of military professionalism and technical expertise. The nation is grateful for your dedication." The handshake that followed felt like a benediction. Here was someone who understood exactly what my work meant, exactly why it mattered, exactly how much skill and commitment it required. No explanation needed, no justification required, no apologetic qualifier about military life being different from civilian careers. The media portion of the ceremony included brief interviews with myself and the Secretary, questions about cybersecurity challenges, and the importance of technical innovation in military operations. I answered clearly and professionally, representing not just my own achievements, but the broader community of military technical specialists who worked in anonymity to protect national interests. As the formal ceremony concluded and guests moved to a reception area, I checked my phone for the first time in hours. No messages from family, which was expected. They were probably having dinner at some famous Parisian restaurant, completely absorbed in their vacation experience, oblivious to what was happening thousands of miles away. But within minutes of the ceremony's conclusion, that would change. Military public affairs officers were already uploading photos and video clips to official social media accounts. News outlets were preparing stories about the ceremony for their evening broadcasts. The Defense Department website would feature the ceremony prominently, with my name and photograph visible to anyone who searched. The recipients of military honors become part of the public record, their achievements documented and disseminated as examples of military excellence. This wasn't a private recognition that could be easily overlooked or minimized. This was a public statement about my value and contribution, broadcast to a national audience that included everyone my family knew. I remained at the reception for an appropriate amount of time, accepting congratulations from colleagues and senior officials, discussing technical aspects of my work with people who understood its complexity and importance. The conversation was energizing in a way that family gatherings had never been, intelligent, respectful, focused on substance rather than superficial social performance. As I finally prepared to leave the Pentagon, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in how I saw myself. For years, I had carried a quiet uncertainty about whether my achievements were genuinely significant or whether I was overstating their importance. My family's consistent dismissal of my career had planted seeds of doubt that grew despite external validation. Now, standing in the Pentagon parking lot with a medal from the Secretary of Defense around my neck and official recognition of my contributions to national security, those doubts were gone. I knew exactly who I was and exactly what I was worth, regardless of what anyone else thought. The reckoning was about to begin, though my family didn't know it yet. In a few hours, their phones would start buzzing with notifications and messages from friends who had seen the news coverage. They would discover that the daughter they had deemed worthless was being celebrated on national television while they were taking tourist photos in Paris. I drove home in silence, not triumphant or vindictive, just clear. Clear about my value, clear about my accomplishments, clear about who deserved my time and energy going forward. The medal felt comfortable around my neck, like recognition that had always belonged there but was finally visible to everyone who mattered. The first notification came at 18:47 hours, exactly 3 hours and 47 minutes after the ceremony concluded. A CNN alert about Pentagon recognition ceremonies, featuring a photo of me shaking hands with the Secretary of Defense. The image was crisp and professional, me in perfect military bearing, receiving recognition from the highest levels of civilian defense leadership. I was making dinner when my phone began buzzing incessantly. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails, social media notifications, all from family members whose silence had been absolute for the past 48 hours. The sudden communication barrage was almost comical in its desperation and intensity. My mother's text arrived first. "Becky, we just saw the news. Why didn't you tell us about the ceremony? We would have flown back immediately. So proud of you." Followed immediately by my father. "Congratulations. Can't believe we missed this. You should have said something." My sister's message was longer and more frantic. "OMG, Becky, I can't believe what I'm seeing on the news. You received an award from the Secretary of Defense? Why didn't you tell us this was happening? We could have changed our flights. This is huge. Call me immediately." My brother sent multiple messages in rapid succession. "Holy shit, Becky, you're on CNN. Secretary of Defense? Why didn't you tell us? This is incredible. Call me back." The voicemails were even more revealing. I could hear panic in their voices, the sudden realization that they had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had dismissed me as worthless and left the country, only to discover that their deadbeat daughter was receiving national recognition for exceptional service. The optics were devastating. They were sipping wine in Paris while I was being honored at the Pentagon. What struck me most was their immediate assumption that the problem was communication failure on my part. Why didn't you tell us?" appeared in every message, as if I had somehow failed to properly inform them of the ceremony's significance. There was no acknowledgement of the note they had left, no recognition that their actions might have consequences, no understanding that being called worthless and abandoned might affect my willingness to share important moments with them. I listened to each voicemail completely, reading every text message, absorbing the full impact of their panic. The transformation from complete indifference to desperate enthusiasm was stunning in its speed and transparency. 24 hours earlier, I wasn't worth a seat on their airplane. Now I was someone they were so proud of and would have flown back immediately to support. The social media component added another layer of humiliation for them. Their Paris vacation photos were still prominently displayed on their feeds, images of them celebrating together, tagged with family gratitude posts, uploaded while I was alone on Thanksgiving. Now their friends and acquaintances could see those posts immediately adjacent to news coverage of my Pentagon ceremony. The timeline told a story they couldn't deny or explain away. I could imagine the phone calls they were receiving from friends and extended family. Saw Becky on the news receiving that Pentagon award. You must be so proud. How was the ceremony? The awkward explanations, the scrambling to create a narrative that didn't make them look like the people who had abandoned their daughter during one of the most significant moments of her career. My phone rang, my mother calling for the 4th time. I let it go to voicemail, along with all the others. For the first time in my adult life, I felt no obligation to manage their emotions or solve their problems. They had created this situation with deliberate cruelty, and now they could manage the consequences without my assistance. The medal sat on my kitchen counter where I had placed it after arriving home, still attached to its ceremonial ribbon. The inscription was beautifully engraved, for exceptional service in defense of the nation. Simple words that represented years of sacrifice, expertise, and commitment. Words that meant more to me than any family approval ever could. I realized that their frantic contact attempts weren't really about pride in my achievement. They were about damage control. They understood that being absent from such a significant moment made them look terrible to everyone who knew about it. Their panic wasn't about missing the opportunity to celebrate with me. It was about the public relations disaster of being revealed as parents who had abandoned their daughter during a career-defining moment. The transformation was complete now. For the first time in our relationship, I held all the power. They needed something from me: forgiveness, explanation, the opportunity to retroactively participate in my success. And for the first time in my life, I felt no compulsion to give them what they needed. I turned off my phone and finished making dinner, eating in the peaceful silence of my apartment while my family frantically tried to rebuild a bridge they had burned with calculated precision. The medal caught the light from my kitchen window, a tangible reminder that some recognition comes from sources that understand value and merit. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more messages, more desperate attempts to rewrite the narrative of the past few days. But tonight, I would sit with the satisfaction of knowing that I had found my worth in the right places, validated by people who understood sacrifice and service. They had taught me something valuable with their cruelty: that family isn't defined by blood or obligation, but by respect, support, and genuine appreciation. By that definition, I had plenty of family. It just didn't include the people who had raised me. The medal would remain on my counter for weeks, not as a trophy or symbol of revenge, but as a reminder that some bridges, once burned, reveal that you never needed them in the first place. Some seats, once denied, show you that you were meant to stand somewhere much higher all along. The silence stretched for 6 days. 6 days of ignored calls, unread text messages, and mounting panic on their end while I experienced the most peaceful week I'd had in years. The beauty of finally understanding exactly where you stand with people is that it eliminates the exhausting uncertainty that had dominated my relationship with my family for decades. On the 7th day, my doorbell rang at 0800 hours. I peered through the peephole to find my brother standing on my doorstep, looking haggard and uncomfortable. He had clearly driven through the night to get back from the airport, still wearing wrinkled travel clothes and carrying that particular exhaustion that comes from international flights and family crises. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Michael." "Becky." He looked nervous, which was unusual for someone who typically approached every situation with entitled confidence. Can we talk? We're talking. Can I come in? No. The word hung between us like a physical barrier. For my entire adult life, I had automatically accommodated family requests, opened my door to their problems, made space for their needs regardless of timing or convenience. This was the first time I had ever simply said no to a family member's request for access. Becky, we need to talk about what happened. About the ceremony. About? He struggled with the words, about the note. What about it? It was wrong. We were wrong. We didn't understand how important your work was, how significant that recognition would be. If you had known that I was receiving a Pentagon award, you would have stayed home? He shifted uncomfortably. Yes, of course. This was a huge moment for you. And if there had been no Pentagon award? If it was just regular Thanksgiving, and I was just your regular sister who happened to serve in the military? Would leaving me behind have been acceptable then? The question caught him off guard. I could see him processing the implications, realizing that his answer would reveal whether their regret was about missing a prestigious event or about treating a family member with deliberate cruelty. We didn't mean it the way it sounded. You're not worth a seat, deadbeat. How did you mean it? He couldn't answer because there was no way to reframe those words that made them acceptable. They had said exactly what they meant, and now they were facing consequences they hadn't anticipated. Look, Becky, we want to make this right. We're planning a celebration dinner for you. The whole family, maybe some of your military friends if you want. A proper recognition of your achievement. A celebration dinner. I repeated the words flatly. For whose benefit? For yours. To honor what you accomplished. Michael, let me ask you something. In the past week, since you found out about the Pentagon ceremony, how many people have asked you where you were when your sister received an award from the Secretary of Defense? His face flushed. That's not what this is about. How many, Michael? A few people mentioned it. And what did you tell them? Silence. Did you tell them that you were in Paris because you had left your sister a note calling her worthless? Did you explain that you deliberately excluded her from family vacation planning and then mocked her military service? Did you mention that you were sipping champagne in French cafes while she was receiving national recognition for protecting American national security? Each question hit like a physical blow. He leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking much older than his 34 years. We made a mistake, he said quietly. No, Michael. You made a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice to exclude and humiliate me. The only mistake was not anticipating that there might be consequences. What do you want from us, Becky? How do we fix this? The question revealed everything wrong with their approach. They still believed this was a problem that could be solved with the right combination of gestures and explanations. They still didn't understand that some damage can't be repaired because it reveals fundamental character issues rather than simple misunderstandings. I don't want anything from you. That's what you never understood. I never needed your approval or validation. I wanted your respect and affection because you were my family, but I never needed them to know my own worth. But we do respect you. We've always been proud of you. Michael, stop. Just stop. You left me a note calling me a deadbeat and saying I wasn't worth a plane ticket. You don't get to revise that history now that it's inconvenient. I watched him struggle to find words that could bridge the gap between what they had done and what they now needed to believe about themselves. The cognitive dissonance was almost painful to witness. The family dinner offer stands, he said finally. Whenever you're ready. I won't be ready. Not for a dinner, not for a celebration, not for pretending that what you did was forgivable because it turned out to be publicly embarrassing for you. So that's it? You're cutting us off permanently. I'm not cutting you off. You cut me off when you decided I wasn't worth including in your lives. I'm just accepting your decision and responding accordingly. Becky, we're family. No, Michael. You're people who share my genetic material. Family is something different. Family shows up when it matters. Family doesn't abandon each other with cruel notes. Family doesn't calculate whether someone is worth basic inclusion and respect. He stood there for several more minutes, trying to find an argument that could penetrate my calm certainty. But there wasn't one, because I was finally operating from a position of clarity rather than hope. I no longer wanted their approval badly enough to accept their abuse. I should go, he said eventually. Yes, you should. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment and realized that I felt no satisfaction in his obvious discomfort, no pleasure in his scrambling to repair what couldn't be fixed. I felt only the clean satisfaction of finally being honest about a relationship that had never served me well. The phone calls and messages continued sporadically over the following weeks, but with less frequency and urgency as they began to understand that I meant what I said. They had burned a bridge thoroughly, and I had no interest in rebuilding it. The transformation wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about finally understanding that some relationships aren't worth preserving, even when they come with the label of family. Some people will only value you when losing you becomes publicly embarrassing, and that's not love or respect, that's damage control. I kept the medal on my kitchen counter for 2 months, not as a symbol of triumph over my family, but as a reminder that recognition comes from sources that understand merit. Eventually, I moved it to a display case with my other military honors, where it belonged, among symbols of achievement earned through service, sacrifice, and dedication to something larger than myself. The Pentagon ceremony had given me more than professional recognition. It had given me the final piece of evidence I needed to understand that my worth wasn't determined by people who couldn't see it. Some seats aren't worth having, and some tables aren't worth joining, even when they're labeled with words like family. The months that followed brought an unexpected peace. Without the constant undercurrent of family drama and the exhausting effort to earn approval from people determined not to give it, I found energy for relationships that actually nourished me. My military colleagues became closer friends. I started dating someone who understood the demands of service life and respected my dedication. I took up hobbies I had abandoned because family obligations had consumed my free time. The silence from my biological family was no longer painful, it was liberating. No more group texts that ignored my contributions. No more holiday planning that excluded me until last-minute guilt required token inclusion. No more subtle criticisms disguised as concern. No more financing their lifestyle choices while being treated as an afterthought. 6 months after the Pentagon ceremony, I received a wedding invitation from my cousin Emma, addressed only to me with a handwritten note. Hope you can make it. Your family's loss has been our gain, looking forward to catching up on everything they were too stupid to appreciate. The wedding was small and elegant, held at a vineyard outside the city. Emma had always been different from the rest of the family, more direct, less concerned with appearances, genuinely interested in other people's lives rather than just waiting for her turn to talk. We had lost touch over the years, partly because my parents had never encouraged relationships with extended family members who didn't fit their social aspirations. Becky. Emma hugged me enthusiastically when I arrived. I can't believe you're here. I was worried the family drama might keep you away. What family drama? I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective on recent events. Are you kidding? Everyone knows about the Paris disaster. My mother was mortified when she found out your parents left you behind for some awards ceremony at the Pentagon. She's been talking about it for months. Really? Oh, honey, yes. The story made it through the entire extended family network within hours. Nobody could believe they had missed something that important. And the fact that they were posting vacation photos while you were receiving a medal from the Secretary of Defense? The optics were catastrophic. I found myself laughing, not with malice, but with genuine amusement. I had been so focused on my own experience and emotional processing that I hadn't considered how the situation looked from the outside. To objective observers, my family's behavior had been obviously and dramatically wrong. Are they here today? I asked. Your parents and siblings? No. Emma specifically didn't invite them after what happened. She said she wanted to celebrate with family members who actually acted like family. The wedding was beautiful, filled with people who were genuinely happy to see me and interested in my life and career. I found myself relaxing in ways I hadn't experienced at family gatherings in years. Nobody questioned whether my military service was worthwhile. Nobody made jokes about my rigid personality or suggested that I should consider more flexible career options. During the reception, Emma's mother, my Aunt Patricia, approached me with tears in her eyes. Becky, I owe you an apology. For what, Aunt Pat? for not staying closer to you over the years, for not realizing how badly they were treating you, for not speaking up when I should have. You don't owe me anything. I do, though. We all knew your parents were difficult. But we didn't understand how cruel they had become until this whole Pentagon situation revealed it so clearly. I'm ashamed that we let family politics keep us from having real relationships with you. That conversation led to others throughout the evening. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had maintained polite but distant relationships with me over the years because my immediate family had controlled access and narrative. Many of them expressed similar regrets about not seeing through my parents' behavior sooner, not recognizing that I had been systematically marginalized within family dynamics. I drove home that night with a phone full of new contact information and invitations to future gatherings. The irony was perfect. By losing my immediate family, I had gained access to extended family relationships that had been obscured by years of dysfunction and control. 3 weeks later, my phone rang while I was reviewing intelligence reports at work. My mother's name appeared on the screen, her first attempt to contact me directly in months. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but decided I was curious about what could possibly prompt her to try again after so much silence. "Hello, Mom." "Becky." Her voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear underlying tension. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "You're not. What do you need?" "I wanted to talk to you about Emma's wedding." "What about it?" "We heard you attended." "I did. Without telling us." "Why would I tell you?" "You weren't invited, and we don't exactly have regular communication anymore." "Becky, this is getting ridiculous. We're family. We should be able to work through this misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I repeated the word with genuine amazement. "Mom, you left me a note calling me worthless and excluded me from Thanksgiving dinner." "That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a decision. We were hurt that you never seemed to have time for family anymore. We felt like your military career had become more important than maintaining relationships with us." The revisionist history was breathtaking. They had systematically excluded me from family planning, criticized my career choices, and then blamed me for not prioritizing people who clearly didn't value my presence. Now they were presenting themselves as victims of my neglect rather than architects of my exclusion. "Mom, let me be very clear about something. I tried for years to maintain a relationship with you despite your obvious lack of interest in my life or respect for my choices. You made it clear that I wasn't worth your consideration, so I stopped offering it." "That's not neglect, that's acceptance." The Pentagon ceremony was wonderful recognition, Becky. We really are proud of what you've accomplished. Are you proud of what I accomplished, or are you embarrassed about how you look to other people when they find out you missed it? Silence. "I thought so." "Mom, here's what I need you to understand. Your approval or disapproval of my achievements is irrelevant to me now. I know what they're worth because they're recognized by people who understand their significance. I don't need validation from people who spent years telling me my career was worthless." "We never said your career was worthless. You said I was worthless. You said I wasn't worth a seat on an airplane. You reduced years of military service to a job that was less important than your social calendar. You consistently dismissed my achievements and mocked my dedication to service. Don't try to rewrite that history now." "Becky, please. Can't we find a way to move forward?" "We have moved forward, Mom. You moved forward by excluding me from your lives. I moved forward by accepting that exclusion and building relationships with people who actually want me around. We're both exactly where we chose to be. What do you want from us?" It was the same question Michael had asked, revealing the same fundamental misunderstanding. They still believed this was negotiation rather than consequence, still thought they could find the right combination of words or gestures to restore a relationship they had deliberately destroyed. "I don't want anything from you. That's what I've been trying to tell you. I wanted respect and inclusion when I was still trying to be part of your family. Now I want to be left alone to enjoy the family I've found, people who value me for who I am rather than tolerating me when it's convenient." The call ended shortly after that, with no resolution because there was none to be found. You can't rebuild trust with people who don't understand why they lost it in the first place, and you can't restore relationships with people who still believe their behavior was justified. I realized as I returned to my work that I felt no sadness about the conversation, no lingering hope for reconciliation, No guilt about my unwillingness to forgive. I felt only the clean satisfaction of knowing that I had finally learned to value myself enough to walk away from people who didn't value me. The Pentagon Medal was now properly displayed in my home office, surrounded by other military honors and professional certifications. It represented more than recognition for technical achievement. It represented the moment I finally understood that family isn't about blood or obligation, but about respect, support, and genuine affection. By that definition, I had plenty of family. It just didn't include the people who had raised me. 2 years after the Pentagon ceremony, I was promoted to captain and received orders for a prestigious assignment at Cyber Command Headquarters. The promotion ceremony was small but meaningful, attended by colleagues who had become genuine friends and extended family members who had filled the gaps left by my parents' absence. Emma stood beside me as I took the oath, tears in her eyes as she watched me accept the additional responsibility and recognition that came with the new rank. After the ceremony, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Your parents have no idea what they lost." She was right, but it no longer mattered. I had learned that some losses are actually gains in disguise, and some rejections are invitations to find better options. The seat they hadn't thought I was worth had led me to a table where I was genuinely welcome, where my service was understood and appreciated, where my character was valued rather than criticized. I still had the note they had left me, filed away in my personal documents, not as a reminder of pain, but as evidence of clarity. Whenever I doubted my decision to distance myself from people who had shaped my early life, I could read those 2 sentences and remember exactly why some bridges are meant to stay burned. You're not worth a seat, deadbeat. They had been wrong about everything except the seat. I wasn't worth a seat at their table. I was worth my own table, surrounded by people who understood the difference between family and DNA, between love and obligation, between respect and tolerance. The Pentagon ceremony had been about professional recognition, but its real gift was personal revelation. It had shown me that worth isn't determined by people who can't see it, and that family isn't defined by people who don't demonstrate it. Some Thanksgivings are about sitting at traditional tables. Others are about learning to stand tall at places where you actually belong. I never saw my biological family again, not because I was avoiding them, but because our lives simply diverged completely. They continued their cycle of European vacations and social media performance art, while I built a career and relationships based on substance rather than appearance. The parallel tracks never intersected because they were heading toward fundamentally different destinations. Years later, I would occasionally hear updates through extended family, divorces, financial troubles, health scares that revealed the shallow foundation of relationships built on convenience rather than genuine affection. I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties, but I also felt no obligation to provide assistance to people who had made it clear that my help wasn't valued. The medal remained in my office throughout multiple moves and assignments, a quiet reminder that recognition comes from sources that understand merit, and that worth is determined by character rather than opinion. It represented the moment I finally learned that some seats aren't worth fighting for, because the right table will always have a place waiting for you. Thanksgiving became my favorite holiday again, celebrated with chosen family who understood gratitude as something demonstrated rather than performed. We gathered around tables where everyone belonged, where service was honored rather than dismissed, where love was shown through presence rather than proclaimed through social media posts. I never received another note questioning my worth, because I had finally learned to surround myself with people who understood it instinctively. The deadbeat daughter they had dismissed became a respected officer, a valued friend, and a cherished family member to people wise enough to recognize what they had. Some losses are permanent, and some gains are worth every bit of what they cost. 5 years after that Pentagon ceremony, I married Captain James Chin in a small military chapel ceremony. He understood the demands of service life because he lived them himself, understood the weight of responsibility because he carried it daily, understood the meaning of sacrifice because he had made the same choices I had. Our wedding was attended by fellow officers, extended family members who had become close friends, and mentors who had shaped both our careers. The absence of my biological family wasn't painful, it was peaceful. No drama about seating arrangements, no criticism of my choices, no underlying tension about whether I was worthy of celebration. Just genuine joy from people who were genuinely happy to witness our commitment to each other and to continued service. During the reception, Colonel Williams, now retired, gave a toast that perfectly captured the difference between chosen family and biological accident. Becky and James represent the best of military values: loyalty, integrity, service above self. They've both learned that family isn't about who shares your DNA, but about who shares your values and stands beside you when it matters most. As he spoke, I looked around the room at faces that had become more familiar and beloved than those I had grown up seeing across childhood dinner tables. These were people who celebrated my achievements without jealousy, supported my ambitions without reservation, and loved me not despite my military service, but because of the character it had revealed and strengthened. The final vindication came not from any dramatic confrontation or public humiliation of my biological family, but from the simple recognition that I had built a life they couldn't diminish because they were no longer part of it. The worthless daughter had found her worth in places that understood value, and the deadbeat had become someone whose presence was treasured rather than tolerated. Some stories end with reconciliation and forgiveness. This one ended with something better: the understanding that not all relationships deserve to be saved, and that sometimes the greatest victory is simply learning when to walk away. Thanks for watching. If this hit home, tap like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that boundaries are strength, not drama. Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment. Questions for you. Have you ever been excluded by family and had to draw a hard line? What last straw made you stop proving your worth to people who wouldn't see it? If you'd gotten that note, would you confront them or go silent? How do you handle holidays after a major family break? Who showed up for you when blood didn't? What's one boundary you're setting before the next holiday season?